Everybody, Dan Illman, Mike Beer. Welcome to Breeders' Cup Focus. In this edition, we're going to take a look at the top 10 contenders for the Breeders' Cup Classic coming up at Santa Anita. Of course, pre-entries are going to be taken next week. This is a preliminary list of 1 through 10 on the most possible runners for the Breeders' Cup Classic. The odds were compiled by DRF's Brad Free. For updated top 10 lists, news, and notes, head on over to drf.com and the Breeders' Cup section. And listen, Arcangelo, Mike, Jenna Antonucci hasn't made a wrong move with Arcangelo ever since winning the Peter Pan. It was on to the Belmont. They freshened him. It was on to the Travers. He did this in the Travers. He proved that the Belmont Stakes was absolutely no fluke, sweeping to the lead on the outside and holding off a rallying Disarm.
Just another really nice performance from this horse who, if nothing else, Dan, we know that distance is just no issue for this horse. The longer, the better. This is, of course, the 1.25 miles that he's going to go on Breeders' Cup Saturday. He's just a dominant winner here. Disarmed runs really well after getting through on the rail, and he's going to, make up a little ground here. But Arcangelo was never in danger. This horse, he's been good right from the start. He doesn't even have to improve to win this Breeders' Cup Classic, Dan. There's a lot to like about this horse.
A lot to like about him. He seems to be maturing physically at just the right time, and he's also catching sort of a Breeders' Cup Classic field where there are a lot of questions, especially with the older horses. Our top 3 horses on this list are 3-year-olds, including Arabian Night and Go Rocket Ride. They ran 1-2 in the Pacific Classic against older horses during the summer at Del Mar. And Arabian Night, Mike, especially for him, I think, the question was the 1.25 miles. He didn't really fire his best shot in the Haskell when against Go Rocket Ride. This time out, he got to the lead and he just fought off all challengers. Go Rocket Ride angles outside and is just going to miss.
Yeah, Go Rocket Ride's going to put in a pretty nice run here through the final furlong. He's going to come up short. Worth noting, though, this was a pretty slow final quarter mile of this race, Dan. I still feel like these two horses both ran really well, particularly Arabian Night, because not only was he on the lead and he wasn't exactly walking up there, but while Go Rocket Ride was sort of sitting in behind, Arabian Night had to fight off a challenge from Slow Down Andy first. That horse comes back to win a Grade 1 in his next start with a triple-digit buyer. And Arabian Night fought that horse off and then held Go Rocket Ride. I mean, they both ran really well, Dan. They'll probably have to take one more step forward if the good Arcangelo shows up.
The co-4th choice on Free's morning line is the X factor in this race. We've seen Japanese horses dominate on the international scene over the last several years. Ushba Tesoro comes to mind. Here's his win in the Dubai World Cup. In the Dubai World Cup night, I thought most of the races on dirt were won by horses on the inside. Now, Ushba Tesoro did save ground on the backstretch and into the turn, but he did get to the outside, and he just stays on and runs by the leader in the stretch. He came out of this race. They gave him some time. He has had a prep in Japan. It was a successful one. I think you have to wonder about his running style over the Santa Anita strip, which could favor speed, but he's a solid horse.
Yeah, he looks really solid to me on paper. I've only seen the last 2 of his starts, Dan. He was obviously good in that one that we just watched. Now, I thought all in all the trip worked out for him there in Dubai. I also sort of felt like the horse that he was running over there at the end probably didn't want the 1.25 miles. I'm still not sure that takes anything away from this horse. The 2 times I've seen him, he's looked pretty good to me.
Before we take a look at 6 through 10, let's talk a little bit about White Abarrio, who just blitzed the field in his most recent start for Rick Dutrow. That was the Whitney, earned a big buyer speed figure, and he beat a very good horse, Cody's Wish, a horse that might not want to go that far. Now, White Abarrio has been freshened since that race. He has been in Southern California. He is acclimated. On his best day, he's good enough to win a race like the Breeders' Cup Classic. He just is a bit of an in-and-outer.
He is, and the distance, I think, is maybe a little bit of a question for him, Dan, but you're absolutely right. I mean, this horse, he's been a good horse for a really long time, and I think it's at least worth pointing out. His last 2 starts since they switched him to trainer Rick Dutrow, buyers of 106 off a troubled trip in the Met Mile, and then a 110 in the Whitney. This horse is going to come into the Breeders' Cup in super form since Dutrow has taken over. He is far from out of this.
Let's take a look at 6 through 10 for the Breeders' Cup Classic. Bright future for Todd Pletcher. He seems like a horse that's just coming into his own at the right time, Mike. The question is he good enough?
Yeah, that's a very fair question to ask. The positive side for him, Dan, is it does feel like he's very lightly raced. He's getting better all the time. The distance is no issue for this horse. His last 2 races are very good. They're both at Saratoga. Maybe that had something to do with it, but those 2 races are very good.
Chad Brown seemingly been very careful with Zandon here in 2023, picking some spots and spacing his races out. It looks like he's coming into this into this race a fresh horse.
Finally got a big win in his most recent start at the Woodward. He'd been on a bit of a long losing streak while always running good races, Dan. He finally broke through last time. He's a closer. He's going to want a little bit of pace to attack in this race, but he shows up every single time. Whether you feel like you want to use him on the win end or not, you got to use him somewhere.
Let's take a look at 1 through 5 again, Mike. Arcangelo really has been very, very impressive in his last several starts. He's the deserving favorite in this race.
Yeah, I think he is too, Dan. I mean, we'll see, how much better the numbers 2 and 3 on this list can get. And it does feel like they do both have some upside as well. But Arcangelo, there's really nothing to knock about this horse. And maybe the big advantage that he has on everybody else in here is he really wants this distance, Dan, and some of these others may not.
That's an excellent point. We saw that in the Belmont at 12 furlongs, the Travers at 10. No worries about him going the classic distance at Santa Anita. Arcangelo, the preliminary morning line favorite for the Breeders' Cup Classic.